To understand the current situation occurring in India right now with the farmers' protests, we have to understand the history that has been building up for decades. Revolutions like this, events like this, protests like this aren't built overnight. This has been building up from decades of systemic oppression from these governments and people in power that have been imposed on these farmers. So we'll begin with the Green Revolution and see how it's been building up to now. Beginning with the Green Revolution, it was attributed by Norman Borlaug around 1940 when he started experimenting in Mexico to create new disease-resistant and high-yielding varieties of wheat. The Green Revolution entailed high-yielding seeds, tractors, and other technology along those lines, irrigation technology, pesticides, fertilizers, GMOs, and a lot of other equipment and chemicals that have been implemented today. The Green Revolution really spread around the 1950s and 1960s, especially around the developing world, as more countries were going into poverty and food scarcity began to rise as well. Regarding India, when they gained their independence on August 15th, 1947, their population thus after increased as well. And with the population growth comes a need to feed all these people. And right before the Green Revolution was implemented in India, they relied on food imports and food aid from other countries because they were on the brink of famine. And so with severe droughts and no money and low productivity, they weren't able to pay or just live sufficiently, and millions of people began to die very quickly. And it wasn't until the Green Revolution and the collaboration between India and America and investments that India began to finally develop a new variety of crops, such as rice and cereals such as millets and wheat. In 1964, they harvested around 12 million tons of wheat, which is only able to feed around 40% of the rapid population growth. This wasn't quite enough. But then under Indira Gandhi in 1966, the Green Revolution was implemented into three main locations: Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh. And this is more in the northern region of India. Punjab is a state, probably most up north, and it literally means the land of five rivers. So a lot of irrigation, a lot of success came from Punjab. Yeah, it says in 1970, 70% of the total farm production came from Punjab. Therefore, the economy rose, productivity rose, and the amount of farmers rose all throughout India. Although the Green Revolution revived productivity and saved millions of people around the world with these new exports and new technology, it also brought the hindrance of the environment, where monocropping became a practice, overgrazing, the use of pesticides and chemicals, and there have been irrigation issues, and there's a lot of downside and pluses with the idea of the Green Revolution. We're not quite at the current situation with the farmers' protests. We still have a little bit more background to cover. So we're going to start with the fact that around 31.6% of Indians are currently food insecure, as well as 221 million are malnourished. And as a farmer, one would think that they would be healthy because they grow their own food, but that is quite the opposite. With farmers making up more than half of the agricultural businesses and employment opportunities in India, they still don't gain enough nutrients, as their diets mostly consist of cereals such as like wheat, millets, and anything along those lines, and oats. Their lack of dietary diversity makes them one of the more forgotten groups of food insecure individuals, as farmers already have to endure laborious tasks of maintaining and keeping up a farm. It also takes a toll on their mental health, as their pressures begin to build up of not being able to provide or maintain for their families and themselves and their business in general. Between now and 1999, approximately 350,000 farmers committed suicide due to crop failures, political pressure and familial pressure. With some of these farmers and villagers, they're actually moving away from the agricultural business and entering the urban sectors, which is seemingly worse for their diets in general because they're more access to processed and unhealthy food options compared to the more healthy but less diverse cereal options back when they were farmers or back when they were in the villages. Now going back, connecting that to the Green Revolution, wheat and rice began to be the center of focus of these farmers, and the government seemingly wanted to really increase exports while also feeding the population of India. But now the idea of water irrigation becomes a major issue. With water being used up for these water-intensive crops such as rice, compared to rice, millets use 2.5 times less water than rice, and so therefore millets are a good form of consumption because everyone can eat it and it's healthy for you as you gain nutrients like iron, zinc, and calcium. But as before that became a big picture in India, millets were one of those foods that only the poor people began to eat. But since the millets are good for you, by 2050 they hope that if everything goes right with fixing water irrigation issues, 1.7 billion could move out of these food insecurity issues today. So that is all a little bit more background, and now we're gonna finally jump into what's going on right now. There's a lot of things that happened really well right after the Green Revolution for a couple of decades, but it quickly went downhill after that. So in 1991, the APMC, which is the Agricultural Produce Market Company, a state-governed program, developed. Also, a side note, understanding that the population during this time is 891.3 million people. So this allowed the agricultural industry to grow and also be safeguarded and protect these farmers from exploitation and ensuring that prices of crops don't go too high or too low. So in the beginning, this was a great thing for farmers because they had specific places to trade, and that is called a mandi, which is like a main hub where you go to and you trade, or if you trade outside of it, is considered illegal. It allowed for growing farmers to have a safe space to trade and receive fair and timely payments for their crops. Also, one thing to note is that there was no middleman in the process. It was one farmer to another, and that is very important to keep in mind as we will discuss the bills that the farmers are protesting against. Farmers enjoyed this luxury as it did allow all types of farmers, big and small, to trade their crops efficiently for resources and money. It's now 2006, and this was where the issues began to rise. Market facilities weren't keeping up with the pace, and the institution was kind of diminishing, and it wasn't becoming an important factor for the Indian government. So with an exceedingly huge amount of population growth, note that the population now is 1.165 billion people. There needed to be more productivity occurring with these farmers and the economy in general. Not being able to maintain the infrastructure for these farmers really began to make the farmers turn into illegal trading, which occurred outside of these mandis, and they found themselves being exploited. So if they stayed within the APMC markets, they would have been exploited, and outside they were exploited. So it wasn't really a win-win situation for these farmers anyway. The APMC Act was passed, and it was an act that mandated the sale and purchase of agricultural items in the specific market, and producers and sellers or traders had to pay a market fee, user charges, and a bunch of little nitpicky fee things that, the farmers needed to go to these markets to make money, but they were also taking out their own money to be able to keep up. Amending these acts would not provide farmers MSP, so this is an important key to keep in mind. MSP is minimum support price, and it is the minimum price for any crop that the government considers a importance for farmers and hence deserving support from them. It is also the price that the government agencies pay whenever they produce a particular crop. It's now 2020, and the current Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, from the BJP party, the Prime Minister since 2014, and he's continued to foster the growth of disparity between these farmers. Farmers, big and small, take up 56.6% of the workforce, which is 166 million people in India, and contribute to 18% of the GDP. And due to the pandemic, they entered recessions that shrunk the economy by 24%, which also prompted farmers to return home and figure out a new source of income for their families. And so now it's September 2020 comes when the three laws, the three acts were introduced. In the open, it looks like a great thing, but understanding the laws, it's actually really awful for all of these farmers. The laws do offer the farmers choices, but this is only really beneficial to the large corporation of farmers, to say the least. And so we're gonna get into the bills right now. So the first bill is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act. So the idea of this bill was to give farmers more choices to be able to trade. So they can trade within mandis, but keep in mind that these aren't maintained to the utmost potential. And they can trade outside of these mandis now, legally, through direct agreements and direct documents with private investors, where farmers have a choice with who they want to invest in, who they want to trade in, and who they want to work with. It seems like a great idea where the farmers have a choice, but really the power goes to these private investors because they have the money, they control the markets, and these bigger private sectors have connections with the government. This bill honestly mostly favors the larger farms because with more money comes the more control prices that these farmers and these private sectors can bring to each other, which essentially outweigh the smaller farms. It looks like a great bill because it gives the farmers choice to trade anywhere legally, but really it only does benefit the larger farms. The second bill is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. So this is contract farming. Price assurances, and the farmers can pick the Prices Act. So that's kind of like a little quotation that I thought of. This was designed to stabilize market unpredictableness and give the farmers to have the power to control contracts and signing and making contracts and picking the prices and everything. So it's almost similar to the first bill, but not really. The farmers will not be able to seek out other traders within these contracts, or honestly, if there is some kind of dispute within the private sectors and businesses and the farmers, they can't go and gain support from the government. The government honestly just wants to leave the agribusiness, which is why private sectors are coming into play with this. The farmers' income mostly depend on the company. This is bad for the farmers because honestly, to understand these contracts, to understand how this whole process works, they need to gain a better understanding and avoid being exploited. So, not to mention, if there is a dispute, they can't go to court. There is a special service provided for these disputes, but it just goes to show how the government has quickly dropped the farmers in order to benefit the private sectors more. So the third bill is the Essential Commodities Amendment Act. This removes foodstuffs and products such as cereals, potatoes, onions, oils, etc. from the list of essential commodities, which also makes sure that the commodities are correctly priced. So the purpose of essential commodities kept these products at a certain price point, and now that the government has once again left kind of leaving our agribusiness, it gives the choice to the farmers to be able to kind of control these prices, but these are everyday items, and so people will want to hoard these items and keep it in, which will increase the demand for these prices and will keep the prices up. If the prices of these items increase by 50%, then the products will go back on the essential commodities list in order in order to control these prices. As people will hoard or as people will trade, the prices will go up, which is great to increase the farmer's income. But now that the government is not regulating these prices, the chance of hoarding and black market trade also really increases because there is no set price for these farmers. They're literally all on their own trying to figure out the nuances of this bill and trying to figure out like what is the correct price and what will be able to provide for them and their families. With all three of these bills, the government is just trying to say that one, they want to leave, and two, they really don't care about the farmers in India. The fact that these bills were created and, introduced during a global pandemic and a recession, and the fact that there weren't any, farmers involved in creating these bills shows how much the Modi government really doesn't care about the agribusiness. And the fact that, 56.6% of the workforce is made up by farmers. Understanding that in order to honestly implement these bills, there needs to be an infrastructure and a general knowledge and transparency between these private sectors and farmers that are going to be hopefully not be taking part of these bills, but if worse comes to worse and it has to come through, there needs to be transparency and a level of understanding from both sides. Considering that since these private sectors are for the government and they're kind of connected in a way, there is a middleman. Now that the private sectors are in here, it just goes to show that the government only really cares about these private companies. With 86% of the farms in India holding less than 2 acres of land, these bills, once again, are helping the bigger businesses that can afford to lose the MSP and fluctuation of prices. If 56% of the workforce and 18% of the GDP comes from the farmers, I feel like there should be more investment and more help towards these farmers, but that's just me. Now, we're finally going to be entering the protests. Now that we understand the history, the Green Revolution, and everything leading up to this moment, we're able to finally look at the farmers' protest and how the Indian government has been reacting to it. So it's November 5th, and more than 200 farm unions from 22 states, they all organized and came together and made an entire nationwide road blockage protest. From Punjab, from Haryana, all these farmers, they all came together and decided to go on a national protest to march to Delhi, which is the capital city. This became the largest protest in history with 250 million protesters. They all came together to march to Delhi. It's November 26th, and the police at Haryana, they decided to start started shooting tear gas, shooting water cannons. And November 27th, the farmers decided to set up camps on the highways along the city borders in defiance of the police, because the police also started to dig trenches and have just abusing their powers to prevent the farmers from reaching Delhi. Labor union farm leaders, they kind of made a mini committee during this time to begin to actually talk with the government and the parliament in India. Know that behind the scenes there have been talks, there have been conversation between the farmers, at least the leaders of each side. They mostly end in deadlocks and it doesn't really get anywhere, but just knowing that there are things happening behind what everyone sees on the media, it's occurring. So now it's December 4th and the protesters are grabbing more attention of the global media, where they decided to make camp and they decided to commit that they're going to stay there, and they're prepared for the long haul, where they're sitting at the Delhi borders. They make tents and camps. They have food service areas like langars. They have many makeshift malls, many trading centers there, schools. They're prepared. It's now December 8th, a few days afterwards, and protesting farmers call for a nationwide shutdown and demand a complete rollback on the new farm law. So there's more pressure building up between the farmers and the government. The shutdown gathered support from many opposition parties and trade unions, especially in the farming states like Punjab and Haryana. A few days after, the farmers decide to make a more permanent camp. It's around December 9th, and this is where the farm union leaders decide to start boycotting bigger businesses, private businesses, because in reality, these businesses aren't tied with the government, so therefore, private businesses and governments are feeding off each other. So this is a good time for farmers, and honestly, anyone that do support the farmers, to start boycotting these multi-million, multi-billion dollar companies. Around mid-December, late December, early January, we see more protests occurring across the world. Like, I know there's a lot of car protests in Philly, New York, London, Canada, everywhere basically that have a Sikh diaspora there, or a farmers diaspora. And this is an important feat, knowing that like this is spreading across the world. So now it's January 12th. Protests are still continuing. The police are still harassing the protesters in their camps, knowing that these are old elders, old men, old women, families that are in these tents fighting for their rights. This is when the Supreme Court in India, they decided to put a hold on the implementation of the 3 bills. But that is mostly, honestly, just to distract the farmers and hope that they would go home, because they're gonna push off implementing these bills for another, 2-3 months, which is not something that the farmers aren't satisfied with, so they're still protesting. So I don't think that really worked out well. And up until now, there still have been deadlocks. There's no official or real solution that really benefits the farmers. So now there's another huge protest compared to the one that was 250 million before in the beginning. So this is January 24th, and the Delhi police actually allowed this protest to occur, and this was a tractor rally. They had a permission to go on a specific route through the city, but on January 26th, they move away from the route. So a lot of violence does erupt due to the farmers moving away from the tractor, and they do reach the Red Fort. And from that, there were the police waiting there. They were all ready for whatever happened, and a lot of violence intensified. They reached the Red Fort and they breached the monument's security, and the protesters, they climbed up to the top and they removed the Indian flag and replaced it with a Nishan Sahib flag, which is sacred to the Sikh community. It's now February, where we begin to see some celebrities like Rihanna and Greta and others speak up against the farmers' protest and just showing their support for the farmers. And from that, as well as other propaganda that the government has been implementing throughout this entire process, has continued to build up the tension between the farmers and the government. We have the government issuing a lot of internet blackouts, a lot of censorship, especially on Instagram and Twitter, a lot of trolling. There was an email campaign sent out to try to dismantle the farmers' protests. The government called the farmers anti-nationalists and terrorists, and that just goes to show how toxic the government is and how low they are able to go to continue to show their power against the innocent farmers and anyone that's involved in it. There are a lot of people that are being arrested at the moment, and they're still being detained from the beginning of the protest to now. Nodeep Kaur, she just got released actually. She's a labor activist. She got arrested for her speaking against the government. And, you know, if the government fears someone that has that much social influence, they're gonna arrest them. And then we have people like Ranjit Singh that are fighting against the police, that are harassing and hurting, especially elders, while they're sleeping in their camps. Like, they just come in and hurt them and beat them. So he got arrested and humiliated by the police. And this has been occurring since November up until now, and I don't think that the farmers are gonna move away from this. I don't think the protesters are gonna walk away. They're gonna keep going until their job is done and these laws do not get implemented and something changes. So that's honestly all the main events that have occurred up until now. All the farmers and protesters are still at camp around the borders, and they're staying there. There are still talks that are happening behind the doors, and there are still innocent people that are arrested and continually getting claims against the police force, rightfully so. I hope they do receive the justice against the horribleness that the police force in India have been going at them from. There's always new propaganda and news popping up every day, so it's kind of difficult to really gather what is occurring, considering that the Indian media has a very nationalistic outlook against the farmers. So a lot of these news outlets have been developed for a longer time, so getting anything new right now is very difficult. Agriculture, farmers are the backbone of society. Agriculture and farming, that was probably one of the first advancements that mankind has ever made after hunting and gathering. Therefore, it was the first occupation, and without it, there is no sustainable life. So what Modi and the government doing to these farmers literally goes against the fundamentals of life and the advancement of society as a whole. So I hope Modi understands that the farmers are in it for the long run and that they're not going to stop until they reached their goal of gaining the rights that they deserve. Thank you for watching if you watched the entire video, and I hope to see you in the next one.